It's wonderful to have our friends from DFDL join us today. We had a very interesting session day before yesterday on Wednesday, where we had their colleagues from Bangladesh and Myanmar talk about those jurisdictions and how it could help from a Make in India perspective. Similarly, I think Vietnam and Cambodia are two jurisdictions which are very hot jurisdictions in Indochina region in Southeast Asia. But many of us in India don't know that much about these two jurisdictions, and therefore we thought there was no other better way to get this by having Jerome and Van Sok from DFDL talk to us about those two jurisdictions. I think what's interesting is that, as we all know, Vietnam has been the darling of foreign direct investment for many, many years. And one always hears about large manufacturing facilities being set up in Vietnam. One wonders how they do that, and I think we will probably get a lesson in regulatory and business-friendly environment that Vietnam has. India does do trade with Vietnam, and Jerome will be talking about that. And we can then explore what Indian companies can actually do in Vietnam. There are few Indian companies doing business in Indochina, but there is obviously scope for many, many more. Similarly, with Cambodia, it's another very interesting jurisdiction, and there is a limited amount of trade at this point. But what's interesting is that there are some Indian companies that have been doing business there for a long time. And whilst I was doing some very quick research, I came across Bajaj Cambodia that has a thriving business in two-wheelers, obviously in that jurisdiction amongst other jurisdictions. So it'll be very interesting to hear from Van Sok about Cambodia as well. The plan right now is we from NDA will spend very limited time speaking about a few conceptual points of outbound investment from India. Before that, Mr. Desai will give some perspective and context, and then we'll hand it over to our colleagues from DFDL who have made a presentation to walk us through those two jurisdictions. And I would request everyone to try and abide by the time limits that I put so that we can get our presenters to spend as much time as possible. So over to you, Nishit Bhai, to lay down some context very quickly, and then I'll jump to Ashish and Ashish.
No, thank you so much, Vivek. Good afternoon and welcome to all the participants today. Once again, I think to learn a little bit about the East Asian and the South Asian businesses and how to do business. The whole idea here is to learn about our neighbors. Often we know people far away in Silicon Valley and Europe and other places, but often we don't know enough about our neighbors. It's very important we do that. And more so now that the global supply chain has come under some difficulty after a pandemic and political and other relationships of US with China and with Japan and other countries, and even India. I think everybody thinks India has a great opportunity to take advantage of the broken supply chain. The whole world is thinking of balancing the global supply chain. Idea is not to take away from one and put everything in another basket. Idea is to balance it out. So in the process, most people last 3 months have been talking about, manufacturing from China can migrate to India. And after analyzing and talking to a lot of consulting firms and others, we find that India is yet not ready for receiving manufacturing at the speed of thought. Yeah, it might happen. We are not against that or otherwise, but I think it may take still 2, 3, 4 years. Who knows how quickly? And India is a huge democracy. It takes a long time to change, and land laws and other laws require, a lot of issues. So we thought, does this mean that India cannot take advantage of this opportunity? Probably not. And therefore, we thought that why not, if at all, some supply chain has to migrate to some other country in the interim, and then as and when India is ready, it may migrate back to India, or India can still take advantage of that. Second thing is that in recent press notes of government has restricted investment into India from bordering countries, particularly China. and with beneficial ownership is from some of these countries, and that's a problem. Now, that again is a further impediment. We are not getting into the justification of, whether it's right, wrong, good, bad, but the fact of the matter is that this will result in twofold whammy. One is that migration of a supply chain to India is slightly tricky. And number two, even if it happens, then how will we manage the investment? Because it's not Chinese or other countries' investment, but direct or indirect investments. Even US investment is affected because ultimately, if something is owned by China into US and coming to India, it can still have delays and stuff like that. So we are in a very tricky situation at this point in time. And so we thought, why not think of Make in India via Southeast Asia? And as a result, we studied Bangladesh and Myanmar last week, few days ago, 2 days ago. And other two geographies which are very interesting are Vietnam and Cambodia. And they have done fantastic job, all said and done, and in fact, it is seeing a significant reserves. Trade surplus is almost $8 billion, if I'm not mistaken. US has become the largest importer of Vietnamese goods, and I think same way. I think Cambodia has been growing at rate of 7, 6, 7, 8% or so, and very little we know about this geography. They are very good. They are very young population, hardworking, a lot more disciplined than what we often see in India, and so it may be a good idea to think as to if we can migrate some of the Chinese facility and bring them to Vietnam or Cambodia. India can invest, provide managerial talent. I have always seen that India has produced very good managerial talent, whether it's, and in Silicon Valley, it is said if you do not have some Indian origin person on your board, that means something is wrong, in a lighter vein. Not, so we can see that it's not that others are not good at it, but I think we have done something right somewhere, both technologically and from management perspectives, whether it's Google or Facebook, everywhere you go, Satya Nadella at Microsoft, you see all the. So we have an ability to harness global talent. We have ability to manage. In fact, we did few projects in China. An interesting model at that point of time was that technology and foreign investment came from US, China manufactured, but Indians managed it. Because we have some talent in managing human resources and stuff. I don't want to take too much time at this point in time. But the whole point is that can we not create a win-win situation that you can migrate some of the Chinese facility to or other countries' facility to supply chain to some of these jurisdictions where even Chinese can own. There's nothing wrong. And Chinese, India, and Vietnamese and others owning it, and we create a facility. And then as time comes on, we can, migrate them to India. And I was just mentioning that almost 51% of APIs in pharma seems to be coming from China, if I'm not mistaken. Now, we can't live without that, however you want to. So it will be a wishful thinking just to say that stop everything from China and do nothing there. And, it will be difficult for people to absorb the additional cost. It may not be very easy. So let us find some creative solutions. This exercise is therefore more strategic and more, in that respect. Can we create some new models of doing business in the world? And with those words, I will stop here. Vivek, you've been very generous in allowing me to speak for a minute or two more. I know you're a hard taskmaster, and I leave it back to you. So please have a friend.
Thank you.
The geography, but both are very interesting countries, both not only from economic perspective, also historical and political and other perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nishit Bhai. Thank you for that. And I'm going to very quickly jump to Ashish Kabra first to give us. You have 2 to 3 minutes, Ashish, and then Ashish Sudhani, similarly 2 to 3 minutes. Ashish, can you tell us a little bit about the overseas direct investment regime from India? Very briefly, and then Ashish Sudhani can tell us a little bit about tax considerations for these Indian companies looking at investing overseas. Again, 6 minutes. Your time starts now.
Thank you, Vivek. I'll try to keep this brief and within the allocated time. As we've been discussing here about investing in Vietnam and Cambodia and doing businesses in those jurisdictions, for Indians looking at those jurisdictions, it's important to understand what are the regulations which actually govern their investments into Vietnam and Cambodia, firstly at the Indian level and subsequently, as our colleagues from DFDL would explain, which is there in Vietnam and Cambodia. So I'm coming at the first level and looking at the India side of things as to what is there within our laws in regard to which apply to the Indian investors. Now, RBI under the FEMA has issued certain regulations which are normally referred to as, in common parlance, the Overseas Direct Investment Regulations, which sort of regulate and govern this area. Generally, the regulations allow all forms of companies, LLPs, registered partnerships to invest in jurisdictions outside India, including Vietnam and Cambodia. Even resident individuals and registered trusts and societies are allowed to invest, but obviously there are certain more limitations for their investment. Generally speaking, investment across all sectors and industries is allowed. Only two are prohibited. First is real estate business, that is buying and selling of real estate. This would not include your development of township and construction activities and so on. And the second is banking. And there's also a restricted sector, which I would say, or I'm calling it the restricted sector, which is the financial services sector. Investment in this sector is also permitted, but there are certain minimal conditionalities which are attached, which need to be adhered to before investment can be made. And I won't dive too deep into all these regulations, but I'll just try and cover a couple of key points over here. One, that the level of investment which is allowed is basically up to 400% of the net worth of an Indian company, that is basically 400% of your paid up capital plus free reserves. Investment is typically in form of equity plus loan or guarantee, or all of them basically are calculated or combined together to ascertain whether you cross this 400% net worth threshold or not, or your investment in this total investment crosses this 400% threshold or not. The investment can be in form of various ways. It could be a capitalization of your exports, swap of shares, remittance from India, foreign currency loans that you may raise outside. So there are various ways in which this investment money can be sourced and utilized for the purposes of investing outside India. Quickly, there are various structures which can be used, but given the time constraints that Vivek has imposed on me, I would not go into these structures. Largely, it's typically a direct investment by creating a subsidiary or a joint venture entity in that jurisdiction. You can also think of creating a holding company outside India above this, operating a joint venture wholly owned subsidiary. So that's basically it, but you can play around a bit more. We can probably deal with that later. And there are more points which come in terms of regular filings which need to be done, permissions in case there's certain to be write-off, but I won't go in that again. One thing I would do note of, which is normally very critical, is for people to understand that cost of capital in India is much higher than other jurisdictions. Probably not, it would be comparable probably in Vietnam or Cambodia, but obviously capital can be raised from various other sources. So in that scenario, Indian companies have the liberty to create a charge on their assets or on the shares of the company or the joint venture wholly owned subsidiary that they set up in these jurisdictions. With that, I'll sort of end over here and try to keep us explanation of the ODI regs very brief. Obviously, there are a lot more things which go into it, but as such, broadly, Indian companies have a wide level of discretion and can go across and invest freely in these jurisdictions.
Thank you so much, Ashish. That was very crisp and brief. And now to the other Ashish, your 3 minutes starts now.
Sure, thanks, Vivek. So I think I'll pick up from where Ashish left off. Basically, from a tax perspective, when you are thinking of doing an ODI, then structuring of these transactions becomes important, especially when the Indian company is investing abroad. Now, a couple of things that need to be kept in mind when we are investing abroad. And like Ashish said, you could do either a direct share investment or even a loan investment. Now, in case of both Vietnam and Cambodia, you can see how the dividend and interest from the share of the loan will have an impact on the Indian company. So from a Vietnam, there is and there's no withholding in Vietnam, which makes this favorable from a Vietnam perspective. With respect to interest, there is only a 10% withholding under the treaty, which again is a benefit. And of course, the Indian company, when they receive the dividend interest, will have to pay taxes in India, depending upon the kind of structure, etc. From a Cambodia perspective, there is a withholding tax rate of 14% on dividends and interest both. So any payments that are made by the Cambodian or the in terms of interest or dividend, would be subject to that 14%, which will of course be creditable in India, and the Indian company will be paying taxes on these amounts. But a couple of other things that we should keep in mind when structuring investments abroad is one is the place of effective management risk. Essentially means that if a foreign company's place of effective management is in India, then there is a risk of that entity being considered to be an Indian resident. Now, the consequence of that entity becoming an Indian resident is that its worldwide income can become subject to tax. And unfortunately, as per Indian laws, the rate of tax for a foreign entity having its firm in India is higher than a resident company. The rate is about 40%, and with surcharge and cess, it can go up to 45%. So that is an important consideration because sitting in India, you will not be able to take decisions of the foreign entities because that could result in a huge risk for the foreign entity becoming a resident in India. The other factor is more from an anti-avoidance perspective, considering India is moving towards a jurisdiction where substance has started mattering, where you need to consider your marketing and business objectives before you go ahead and start a structure with setting up companies all over the world, including Vietnam and Cambodia. There should be a clear non-tax objective. There should be marketing and business objectives that you have in mind before you start investing into any of these jurisdictions. I think there's a lot more to cover, of course, but I think I'm going to stick to my 3 minutes that Vivek has given me. Vivek, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very good. Now let me introduce Jerome. He's been waiting patiently. Jerome, the floor is yours. Tell us about Vietnam.
So here is a map of our region, basically. So it's Southeast Asia, with the exception of Bangladesh, where we started about 10 years ago now. So we started in Cambodia and Laos. We've expanded to Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam after that, and then opened a very small office, which is only for marketing purposes and liaison purposes. Then Bangladesh, and we have a very close relationship with a Philippine firm, which is part of our network. So with these offices, we have about 170 advisors, many nationalities, and a mix of local advisors and foreign advisors in each of these jurisdictions, which are generally difficult, complicated, developing. And this is what we do, and we don't want to venture into new areas, new countries which are more developed. So this is really our DNA. If you can move to the next slide, please. So we organize as practice groups. We're completely integrated. It's one company which owns subsidiaries in each of the countries where we have practices. We are structured, as many other firms, into practice groups. So we have banking and finance, compliance, investigations, corporate, employment, energy, infrastructure, real estate, restructuring, insolvency, and tax accounting. We are really, the DNA of the firm has historically been energy, mining, infrastructure. We have a very strong M&A practice as well. And we have seen, especially in the most recent years, a lot of the energy and infrastructure transactions are structured through M&A. But we do advise investors from all over the world in each of our markets, including Indian investors, into setting up, doing the right thing, being in line with the local requirements, which is critical to stay here in the long run. We have desks, including an India desk, a China desk, and a Korean desk, and a French desk. This is mainly meant to bridge cultural gaps that may exist in certain parts of the world, and making sure that our clients get the right service from our different offices. As I said, we're completely integrated, so that enables us really to make sure that the right people are on the right matter and serve the client. So I'll speak briefly about Vietnam, key facts and a few things to consider before thinking about investment in the country. And then I'll let my colleague Van Sok to talk about Cambodia. I've been in, just as a matter of very brief introduction, I've been in the country for over 15 years now. the country has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. I would like to say, and I always say, to the best. I mean, there's never been a point of time where I thought the country was going backwards. Obviously, in some instances, there are policies which drive the government to make decisions in one way or the other, but the direction has always been very clear. It's an economy which is growing very fast, and the government has been very, very focused on making sure that foreign investment is welcome and is well treated, and this has worked pretty well historically. So a few key facts here. Vietnam has been part of the WTO since 2007. This has widely opened the range of businesses that foreign investors can invest in, and stabilize the number of things which enable foreign investors to be, in most instances, at par with the rights of local investors. It's a big country, not as big as India, obviously, but we're close to 100 million people with a young population which is hungry for more access to consumer goods, and so it's becoming a market which needs not to be left aside when considering the country. It's a real market which is growing very fast. It's a planned economy, and this is very important to understand this. Everything is part of a plan. Everything works within a plan, and it's important to make sure that any moves that an investor is planning for its investment in the country is in line with the plan. So we have FDI figures here. It's a country which is heavily reliant on foreign direct investment, and the key investors are from Hong Kong, South Korea, and Singapore. A lot of investment is routed through Hong Kong and Singapore. So in some instances, you'd have some investment from China, for instance, which is routed through Singapore or Hong Kong, and which doesn't appear as in the figures as direct investment from China or the region. There is a substantial Indian community in the key cities of the country, which are Hanoi, which is the capital, and Ho Chi Minh City, which is more like the business hub, and some short-term visitors, mainly for business, because Indian investors are investing in the country in a number of sectors. If you can move to the next slide, we'll touch on this. Not right away. So it's important to understand also the history of the country. It's a country which has gone through a few wars in the last 70 years, and this has built a lot of resilience. This has built also a population which is relatively young. The wars have been hitting some trenches of the population at some stage, and that has resulted in a country, when the country reopened in the late 90s, as a country, very young country, which was ready for opening itself to the economy of market and to the whole world, with accession to the WTO in the beginning of the 2000s. Next slide, please. So the legal system is mainly based on the civil law system, but there are a lot of influences. American law, Chinese law, which basically gives you an idea on how it may work. It doesn't always work well. It's working better and better. It's a legal system where things change very fast. The law changes every other week, especially in the tax sector. My tax colleagues are really having a hard time keeping up with all the developments. But as I say, it's all part of a plan. So the direction remains and remain toward putting in place a better environment for business. Next slide, please. So as I said, it's an economy which is integrated. Vietnam has entered many multilateral agreements on business and investment, including with India. The most recent treaty signed and acceded by Vietnam is the Europe-Vietnam FTA. This will come into effect. Pardon me. This will come into effect in about a month, on the 1st of August. So we tried here to compare Vietnam going to India as compared to India going to Vietnam, and you'll see that there is a big imbalance. Vietnam is not investing overseas very heavily, but is a trading partner to a number of countries. So here you can see the imbalance. India has invested much more into Vietnam than Vietnam has invested into India. But there are a number of sectors where Vietnam is actually trading with India aggressively. You'll see the sectors which are the focus of area for trade, as well as for investment: energy, minerals, agriculture, coffee, chemicals, and obviously manufacturing generally have been the focus of Indian investors so far. Can you move to the next slide, please? So if you look at the numbers, in 2019, we had an investment in capital from India to Vietnam close to $1 billion, and manufacturing was taking the big bulk of it in terms of the sectors invested. Next slide, please. So talking about how to get into the country and what you need to understand as a foreign investor. First, you're not in your country. It's a country which has historically been relatively protective towards the interests of the locals, and a number of things are done differently. Vietnam has been focusing on ranking better on the World Bank index on easiness of doing business, and they have done a number of progresses, typically addressing the criteria used by the World Bank. But there is a lot of bureaucracy, some red tape in some instances. It's important to understand that it's still a developing economy with developing habits in terms of corruption. There are some areas where corruption is an issue, and you need to understand it, do the right thing, and being completely compliant so as to limit the chances of the possibility of corruption happening within your organization or by the administration dealing with you. If you can move to the next slide. As I said, in the ease of doing business, Vietnam is ranking not so bad if you take into consideration where it is and how it started. But as I say, it's really because it's been specifically addressing the issues which the World Bank is looking at in making this assessment. Can you move to the next slide? We'll now look into more. Next slide, please. This is Da Nang, by the way. This is the third biggest city in the country. Very, very booming city right in the center of the country. So I'll go quickly through the various forms of investment that foreign investors can select to get into the country, set up and operate. You can either do it greenfield, or you can invest in an existing company. There are other ways which are business cooperation contracts, which foreign investor can use to cooperate with local investors, and there are other structures like representative office or branches, which are either not used as branches or of limited use if you really want to do business, because a representative office in Vietnam is not allowed to undertake business. So when you establish a company, you need to go see a licensing authority, which will grant for a specific project of a foreign investor an investment registration certificate. This is the first thing to get. This will set the amount of capital that you need to invest or you're allowed to invest, and a number of other things. If you have access to land, this is recorded. And then the enterprise registration certificate will create the legal entity which will you enable to operate. If you're buying into an existing company, it can either be a limited liability company or a trust company. You can buy existing shares from an existing investor. In any case, very often you need to go and apply for a specific approval to be allowed as a foreign investor to invest into the company. There are a few exceptions in very, very mainstream business lines, but most of the time you need to get this approval. So you need to understand that as a foreign investor, every purchase or sale of equity into a business will be subject to, from one way or the other, will be subject to the approval of an authority. And I think this is very important to understand in negotiating your agreement if you are dealing with joint venture partners, because whatever your contract says, at the end of the day, you need to register a change, and the joint venture partners, the locals, will always be in a better position to influence the local authority or to have things delayed if need be. So it's very important to understand this requirement in the country. If you can move to the next slide. A few other things that you need to take into consideration is businesses where it's not possible to invest, and this is a fairly broad list, but fairly sensible list as well. Some areas where investment by foreign investors is conditional, and these include banks, non-banks, credit institutions, trading of specific products, real estate business, advertising, medicine trading. All these businesses are subject to a higher level of scrutiny by the authority, so you don't have any automatic right to invest as a foreign investor. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. It means that there is a higher degree of scrutiny, and the conditions are higher, more cumbersome than in other sectors. If you can move to the next slide, please. So, foreign currency, it's important to understand that the Vietnamese dong, which is a local currency, is not freely convertible. You can remit into the country capital in the form of equity if you invest into a company or if you start up a new business, or as a loan to a local entity or to your subsidiary if you've already invested. And you can remit the money outside of Vietnam only if you're doing it in the right way. And this is very important to understand, because in some instances, when things are not done in the right way, then you face a number of issues to get your money out of the country. So very important to make sure that you're doing it the right way in the first place. It's important also to understand that specific accounts need to be used for specific purposes. So if you're investing into a foreign direct investment company, the money has to be routed through that specific account. That, again, conditions the ability to get the money out. But if things are done in the right way, you can remit your profits, proceeds of equity, freely, subject to having paid taxes in case of a sale, for instance. Dividends can be remitted overseas without any withholding tax. This is one relatively attractive feature of the Vietnamese tax system. If you can move to the next slide, please. If the money comes in as a loan, there are a number of restrictions to be taken into account. The first one is if you do a loan which has a term or which is repaid within a year, it's fairly easy and nothing too complicated. But if the loan is meant from the beginning to have a term of a year or above, or if the loan is not repaid on time, then you get into a number of complications which are basically administrative. You need to register the loan with the State Bank of Vietnam. The State Bank of Vietnam is basically controlling the amount of capital which stays in the country beyond working capital for a short period of time. And this basically requires the borrower to go and apply for registration, proves that the purpose of the loan is right, and get a certificate which records the amount which can be remitted in the country and afterwards remitted out of the country, as well as a schedule of repayment. This is very rigid once it's set, and if, for instance, you want to change your schedule of repayment, even if the borrower is agreeable and the lender is agreeable, you still need to go back to the State Bank of Vietnam and amend your registration certificate to get your money out. So this is just an outline of what is very important to bear in mind when you want to fund your project. You can't just fund it by way of debt freely without considering these very important items. In terms of the sectors that are pretty attractive and we have seen attractive for Indian investors in recent years is manufacturing. A lot of manufacturing related to agriculture. We've seen a number of Indian players getting into IT also. We have here a population which is young, relatively well educated, and eager to get into programming and software development, and a number of players of the US, of Europe, and India have been using Vietnam as a base for relatively low cost manufacturing of IT as well. As I was mentioning, agriculture, a number of areas in the country receive a lot of interest from Indian investors for agriculture. This is on the back of access to land, which is relatively inexpensive in remote areas, as well as I said, a capability of the local workforce to work efficiently at low cost. But as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a country of 95 million people, very young, which is accessing to consumer goods, and therefore this is very often seen as a place where you want to put your flag and develop a brand that will grow with the market. And international investors are considering Vietnam as a market as well. So that's closing my remarks. If I am correct, there might be another slide. Can we move to the next one? So yeah, that ends my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions you might have afterwards.
Thank you, Jerome. And again, thank you everyone for spending your time to attending this webinar. My name is Wan Sok. I'm a partner from DFDL Cambodia. So I want to start with introducing you to Cambodia. Next slide, please. So Cambodia is very small when compared to Vietnam. We have a total population of more than 16 million in 2019, while Vietnam is more than 90. We have enjoyed a very sustained GDP growth over the last 20 years, with the annual growth of 8%. However, with the impact of COVID-19, the World Bank has estimated that the economy in Cambodia will be dropped to around 2.5%. That would be the best case scenario. If not, it will be a minus percentage for this year. The total foreign direct investment is recorded to be more than 3.7 billion USD for 2019. And the major investor, not surprisingly, come from China, South Korea, Vietnam, and followed by Japan and Singapore. They invest mainly in construction, infrastructure, textile manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. While Cambodians speak Khmer as our official language, but English, French, and increasingly Chinese Mandarin has become foreign language. In Cambodia, Khmer Riel is the foreign currency, but USD has become the main currency in Cambodia since 1993, which was due to the presence of the United Nations military force back then. the Cambodian government have in recent years tried to put in place policy and supporting mechanism to dollarize the economy back to Khmer Ring. So very different from Vietnam. We say that we are a multi-party, still on the first slide, please. We say that we are a multi-party democracy under constitutional monarchy, and we have the king that head the state and the prime minister that lead the royal government of Cambodia. But unfortunately, 2 years ago, the main opposition party in Cambodia was dissolved. So currently, the ruling government lead the ruling government lead the majority political party in the parliaments. In terms of legal system, we are a civil law system, largely influenced by French and recently German and Japanese legal system. Nevertheless, law related to economics and commerce are modeled after common law system. This is because we receive a lot of legal technical support from ADB and the World Bank. And this law includes the company law, secure law on transaction, and insolvency law. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of doing business in Cambodia, the government has been working very hard to improve the ranking. We have slightly improved for 2019 based on the 2020 report. Cambodia ranked 144, which is still far behind Vietnam, 70, and Thailand, 21st. As you can see here, it takes 187 days to start a business in Cambodia, and this includes register a legal entity, register the tax, and register the employee with labor authority. However, in terms of getting credit, it's more easier with only 25 days. And this is caused by the high competition among financial service providers because they are willing to give out loans by not requiring hard title mortgage or what we call certificate of land ownership as a mortgage. They are willing to take guarantee, personal guarantee from relative of the borrowers. So it's quite easy to get credit in Cambodia. Next slide, please. I will skip this slide because of the timing, because it's similar to the very first slide. So here we want to show you the bilateral trade between Cambodia and India. The figure is not as high as in the case of Vietnam. So the total trade figures in 2018 was only more than 224 million USD. And the key export item from India to Cambodia, as you can see, is drug and medical equipment. And as of now, there is also a great interest of Indian investor in this area. Late last year, I think around November 2019, the Indian Chamber of Commerce in Cambodia was set up. And I was very fortunate to attend one of their events, met a lot of Indian investors who want to set up a hospital in Cambodia. There is high demand in that area. And currently in Cambodia, for hospital, the key player is Vietnamese and Thai big brand name hospital. And there are those, I think, SME Indian investor who were looking to import drug to distribute in Cambodia. Next slide, please. Next one, please. So here, just want to introduce you to our legal system. The Cambodian government has tried to put in place since 1993, the year at which Cambodia obtained full peace and stop the civil war in our country. One of these is the company law of 2005. So under the law, a foreign business may set up a business as a subsidiary, rep office, branch office, or joint venture with a local partner. The minimum capital requirement is only 1,000 USD, provided that par value per share is not less than $1 US. And there is no foreign ownership restriction in almost all the sectors, except for land ownership, which is prohibited for foreigners, travel agency, and tour operator business, which are reserved only for local investors. In addition, foreign business may appoint their staff from offshore to serve as a director or a branch manager in Cambodia, and those director or manager do not have to reside in Cambodia. They can oversee the business if they could from India, provided that the employment is within the 10% cap of foreign employment. To elaborate on this, Cambodian labor law limits the employment of foreigners to 10% of local labor force. Just around last week, the Cambodian government has introduced a unified online incorporation process that want to ease the doing business burden, reduce the 187 days to just 8 working days to start a business in Cambodia. This remains to be seen whether this will be achievable or not, to set up a business in Cambodia just for 8 working days. Another key law would be the investment law of 1994. So the 1994 investment law was set up mainly to lure foreign direct investment into Cambodia. The law introduced a qualified investment project or QIP. So under this QIP scheme, investors, both local or foreigners, can be entitled to some form of incentive, which I will demonstrate in the next slide. But there are sectors such as duty-free shop, import, export, wholesale, or transportation that are not entitled to the incentive under the QIP scheme. Other than this, investors in general, whether they are under QIP or not, they will be afforded with general investment guarantee from the Cambodian government, such as the government will not take any nationalization policy that will impact their private property or fix their production volume or the price of the products. In addition, in order to attract more or diversify the source of foreign direct investment, given that currently we rely heavily on China, there will be amendment to the investment law, which is expected to be issued in 2020. And this amendment will try to maximum reduce the administrative process in applying for the QIP and also introduce incentive in some geographical areas such as those near the border of Vietnam and Thailand and Laos. Next slide, please. So here are the high-level overview of the incentive under the QIP scheme. This includes income tax incentive. So investors that have a QIP status, they can enjoy income tax exemptions up to 9 years. Then custom duty exemption for importation of equipment and material that will be used in the building of the plants or the production of their QIP product. And then for investors that locate in a special economic zone, there will also be VAT exemption on the import or export of a QIP project. I just want to note on the custom duty, while these are exemptions, when investors import the equipment and material into Cambodia. But if the investor want to sell on those exempted equipment to a potential buyer or they want to dispose of it, if the company one day is winding up, then they will have to request for a specific approval from the government of Cambodia in order to continue to enjoy this exemption, because without this approval, they would be required to repay all the custom duty that they should have paid at the beginning. In addition to the tax and custom incentive, foreign investors, while they could not own land in Cambodia, they can try to obtain a concession right with a maximum term of 50 years. And this is particularly useful for those investors that want to have a concession right over agricultural land, large area of land, or they can sign a long-term lease with a term of 15 to 50 years And this long-term lease, if it is perfected by way of registration, it can be used as a collateral to secure financing as well. Finally, for foreign investor that they need foreign management expert or technical staff whose skills are not available in Cambodia, they can seek for support from the Cambodian government with respect to work permit and visa. I mentioned earlier that Cambodia have a cap of 10% for entity to hire foreign employee. However, if foreign business, in particular those having a QIP status, can have a valid reason that they need more than 10% because the skills are not here in Cambodia, then the labor authority would approve that request. Next slide, please. So you will see here there are only 3 sectors: retail, wholesale, real estate, insurance. And then in the next 2 slides, there are more sectors. So all of these sectors are key sectors of development in Cambodia and have been interested very much by investors in China and South Korea in particular. But for your interest, as I understand that most of Indian investors would look into the retail and wholesale for pharma products, I will skip the insurance part and just go through very quickly on the first 2 sectors. So as I mentioned earlier, for retail and wholesale, no foreign ownership restriction. You can come set up your own company, or you can join venture with a trusted local partner. There is no particular license in order to do a retail or distribute products in Cambodia unless it is a pharma product or medical equipment or cosmetic. Similarly, for real estate, foreigner can buy condominiums from first floor. And just before COVID-19, there have been a lot of investment in this area because of interest of Singapore, Hong Kong, and Chinese investors that want to purchase condominium for investment in Cambodia. Next slide, please. So I will go very quickly for these 3 sectors: banking, stock exchange, and education. They are all no foreign ownership restriction. So Indian investors are welcome to invest in these sectors, except that this sector need a specific approval in order to operate the business in Cambodia. Next slide, please. This for mining and powers, we know that there is Mesco, one of the largest Indian company in Cambodia, that are doing gold refinery productions in Cambodia, and they have just resumed their production plan 3 weeks ago because of the COVID situation in Cambodia has been eased down. So for mining and power, similarly to other sectors, 100% ownership of foreign investment is welcome, while majority of this project currently are owned by Chinese company. For manufacturing, it's just similar to other sectors. Majority of them are under QIP status, and investors are from China, Taiwan, and some local conglomerate that operate in these sectors. Can I have the next slide? Okay, in terms of exchange, you will see that we have a legal framework that is more relaxing, not as restricted as in Vietnam. So no foreign exchange control. Parties are free to denominate their transaction in any currency, except in the case of national crisis or security reason. The Central Bank of Cambodia may impose exchange control, but we have not seen such action taken by the central bank so far. And one of the most attractive policy for the Cambodian investor is that foreign business are free to repatriate their profit out of the country without requiring a particular approval, but they just have to do that via a commercial bank. And the bank will then just need to do the customer due diligence as part of anti-money laundering process and report the transaction to the central bank when it is or more than 100,000 USD. When it comes to offshore financing, there's no restriction as well. That's a good news, I think, for any investor. So foreign business in Cambodia is free to take financing from their offshore shareholders or offshore lenders, and they do not have a reporting obligation. That the reporting obligation would fall on the commercial bank as part of their AML process. Can I have the next slide? Yes. So similar to any other ASEAN country, Cambodia has enacted all the intellectual property related law, trademark, patent, and copyright. However, in reality, the enforcement of this law has been very limited, except those areas related to trademark law. And this is largely due to the income of brand name business, such as those in food and beverage, that they have a franchising business in Cambodia. And we see a surge in trademark registrations and trademark related dispute matters as well. Foreigner, however, they can do an online search of their trademark. They want to check that before you file the registration application with the authority in order to verify that your mark has been registered by any person or any similar mark has been registered. Finally, on dispute resolutions, unlike in common law system, we don't have the concept of case law or precedents. So a court decision, unfortunately, has not been publicly made available either. And much of the time, we rely on lawyer interpretations and a base case scenario interpretation of the law. Choice of foreign law and foreign dispute resolutions are, of course, recognized by Cambodian law, although as a matter of practice, a Cambodian court may not be willing to enforce a foreign judgment. And this is because Cambodia have not signed any treaty of reciprocity with foreign countries, except for Myanmar. So we have done quite well in terms of alternative dispute resolutions with a chamber, commercial arbitration chamber set up in 2009. Although there have not been many cases referred to the commercial arbitration centers, but the FDL as a law firm has tried to introduce these forums to a party, in particular when they are local party, because it costs less when compared to arbitration in Singapore and in Hong Kong. In terms of independence and impartiality, that has to be seen how much impartial they are and how competent they are in resolve commercial dispute. Last one is foreign arbitral award. So Cambodia is a member of the New York Convention on Foreign Arbitral Award. The court will not re-examine the merit of the case. So there have been 2 successful arbitral awards that recognize and enforce in Cambodian court. But I wish to note that party to these 2 awards were foreign investor. There was no involvement of local conglomerate. So we can say we are not quite sure what the court position would be like if one of the party is a local powerful person. Next slide, please. Investment opportunity. So in the next slide, we have list down the priority sector that the Cambodian government will focus on in the next 5 years. So they aim to achieve development of this area in 2025, which I believe now would have to be delayed because of the pandemic. These policies are formulated because Cambodia wants to become an industrial-based economy instead of agricultural-based economy. We know that 2 of these sectors may be of great interest to Indian investors. This is in the productions of drug and medical equipment and the development of industry that support information and communication technologies. So This is it for my presentations, and I'm well aware of the timing. I see that Vivek or Mubek have not stopped me. So Jerome and myself would welcome any question that you have with respect to Vietnam and Cambodia.
Thank you so much, Vansok and Jerome. I think that was eye-opening presentation on both your jurisdictions. As far as questions are concerned, there is one general theme, and I think you've already touched upon it. Vansok, you certainly talked about COVID and its impact on the Cambodian economy. I believe you think COVID is pretty much getting under control. And so just if both of you could just comment on what does it mean for Vietnam and Cambodia, and does it put a spanner in the works as far as the growth is concerned?
So Jerome, if I may start first. So in Cambodia so far we have 129 cases, all imported cases. There have been no what we call local outbreak as yet. We are lucky, that's what I can say. And all have been recovered and discharged from the hospital, except for I think 3 remaining in the hospital in Phnom Penh. Life have been back to normal. As you can see, I don't wear mask in the office. And we have just seen a report from the Central Bank of Cambodia that say the financial sector in Cambodia remains strong and demand for finance from local people still remain the same despite of COVID. But inevitably, we can observe that sector that rely on foreign visitors such as tourism, include food and hotel, they are heavily impacted by this. So unless international flight resume back their operations, this tourism sector will continue to be impacted.
Thank you. And Jerome?
This is pretty much the same for Vietnam. 95 million people. We have a total of 300 cases, most of them imported. We've been counted 70 days since the last local case of transmission. The Vietnamese government has been very, very strong and very effective very early.
Yes.
So I say, Vietnam has been very strong and very, very efficient in getting things under control very quickly. For a country of a population of 95 million, we've had 300 plus cases in total, mainly imported by returnees coming back to Vietnam. We've counted 70 days since the last case of local infection, local transmission. The problem now is that the authorities are not very eager to reopen the doors because they've been so efficient, and this is probably where the problem lays now. So no international flights coming in, and we've seen obviously the hospitality and tourism sector being heavily impacted by the crisis. Manufacturing as well, whenever it relies on or it depends on the demand elsewhere in the world. So some sectors are more heavily impacted than others, but we have a local economy which works normally. There's been only 2.5 weeks of very mild lockdown, very mild, really things where only restaurants were closed for 2.5 weeks, and spas and bars. But this has been very limited. And again, there are not many cases. So tourism is going to be impacted in the long run. The real estate prices don't give any sign of softening. The revised figures for the growth of the country are down, but still positive. We have a consensus around 3.5%, which is still pretty decent in the current environment where most of the countries are planning for recession.
Okay. Thanks, Jerome. Jerome, there is an interesting question for you. You can either respond to it now or respond to a data. It's about carrying out defense business in Vietnam. So firstly, can a foreign investor invest in defense? And how tough or how easy is it?
Is defense? I mean, irrespective of what the laws say, I would think that unless you do it with
A joint venture.
a joint venture with an entity under the Ministry of Defense, then there is no way to do it. But then I am now aware of situations where joint initiatives have been started. The Vietnamese, and this goes a bit beyond the question. I think that the Vietnamese government has been historically very good at spreading the risks and being a good friend with everyone, rather than making any exclusive relationships. So this is true for the US. This is true for China. This is true for India, and they have a number of MOUs with many powerful countries where they keep very good relationships. And I think this is part of the strategy of the government here, of the party in the long run, maintain a good relationship with a number of people, which enable the country to survive with such a powerful big brother just north.
Okay, great. I think one of the yeah, Nishibhai, go ahead.
No, sorry, I just want to know in Vietnam and Cambodia the tax system, and what is the corporate tax rate? Is there a tax on dividend? I heard that there is no tax on dividend, and is there a capital gains tax? So corporate tax, dividend, and capital gains in Vietnam and Cambodia, and separately, what are the personal tax regimes? So if you could just clarify on that.
Sure, I can get started on this. So in Vietnam, the corporate income tax rate is 20%, 17% for smaller businesses. Dividend can be remitted outside of Vietnam tax-free, and
Capital gains tax.
Capital gains tax will be taxed as a rate of 20% in most instances. There are exceptions for for transfer of shares into listed companies, depending on who the investor is. But the default rule is 20%.
Personal tax rate? What is the personal tax rate?
Personal income tax rate ranges from 0 to 35%, but 35% is a higher rate, but it kicks in at a income of about 3,500 a month, so it's fairly quick.
Yeah, and any inheritance tax or wealth tax or any other tax? Because French typically had the wealth tax, and so I'm just curious whether.
Yeah, there are some inheritance tax, but there are some inheritance tax, and the calculation of them is pretty complex, and I think goes beyond the purpose of this call, unless you know you're a resident and you're it would be fairly limited for what a foreign resident be subject to.
Yeah, no, generally, no problem. Thank you so much. And in Cambodia?
Hi. So Cambodia is much better. We don't have the capital gain tax. It's 0%. And for the capital income tax, the corporate income tax, it's only up to 20%. For dividend, if it is distributed to local shareholder, that's 0%. But if it is sent to offshore shareholders or non-resident shareholder, the withholding tax of 14% will be applied.
And you get credit for the corporate tax paid by the company, I think, on 14%. Right.
Sorry, the corporate income tax is maximum 20%.
Is not creditable against the dividend tax, so there is no.
No, it cannot be credited against dividend tax.
Understood. Okay. So there is no franking of dividend. Okay, understood. Thank you so much. And personal tax rates? Any personal tax rate idea?
So currently, in individual person like myself is only subject to salary tax that is between 0% to 20%. However, later this year or next year, the government will aim to collect personal income tax as well.
And no inheritance tax, I hope.
Sorry, what kind of tax?
Inheritance or estate tax, inheritance tax?
No, no.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you so much. Vivek, please go ahead.
No, I think we can end here. I just wanted to, before thanking you both, just wanted to make one broad comment. What at least I learned, it's very interesting. Number of laws and regulations in India seem to be much simpler with respect to foreign investment compared to what I learned about Vietnam and Cambodia, whether it's exchange control or requiring approvals from government authorities. Having said that, it's much more difficult to set up manufacturing facilities in India than it is probably to set up in Vietnam and Cambodia. Now, I think that's a lesson to learn, that it's not only complexity of law that keeps people away, it's more, I believe, the word that Jerome used, everything is planned. And there is a plan for, I'm assuming Cambodia follows the same system, that there is a plan what will happen. I know Singapore does the same thing, having been based here. So maybe planning is more critical and certainty is more critical than just the fact that you can come and do what you want without any approval, which is predominantly what India allows you to do. But still there are a lot of difficulties. So maybe that's a good takeaway, that plan and be certain about what you are allowing the foreign investors to do or not to do. So again, thank you so much.
What is most interesting is that with all these difficulties, including the language barriers and the, topography and all those kind of things, Vietnam and Cambodia have attracted a fairly good amount of foreign investment and also traction, So relative to the size of the country and the market, I think they've done a fabulous job, and I'm sure we have a lot to learn in terms of implementation and execution of our laws and policies. And I think do some rethinking as to how can we learn from them. And I think there is both of those countries provide win-win situation. Sorry for my interruption.
No, absolutely, completely agree with you. So thank you, Wansok, and thank you, Jerome, for joining us and for this enlightening discussion. There are a few more questions. I'll send them to you so that you could then respond to those questions. So again, thank you, everyone, and my colleagues, Ashish and Ashish, and of course, Nishit Bhai, for being there throughout. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thanks for
everyone.
inviting us here.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.